from you. Bless this small portion that we return in your name, so that we may multiply your good works throughout our community and into your world. Amen. Our first reading today comes from Genesis chapter 21, beginning with verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abram, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named after you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
Our second reading is from the letter of Paul, the first letter of Paul to the church at Corinth. It is a reading that is enormously familiar to, I imagine, every single person in this room. One that you have probably heard many, many times. It is probably read at 9 out of 10 Christian weddings. It is often read at memorial services. And that's all well and good, but that means that it is being read out of context. This letter of Paul's, and in particular this section, is addressing the problems of a badly divided church. Corinth had many factions and people moving in different directions at odds with each other. And Paul has addressed that issue. And Paul says, this is how you heal division. This is how you heal hatred. So hear these words in our context today, where our world is so rife with division and hatred. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. and if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard and the spaces in between open our hearts to one another and to your love. Amen. Many of our Christian sisters and brothers suggest that we need to get back to the family values found in the Bible. And perhaps if they're talking about love and patience and mutual support, they are right. More of all those things would be very good for our own families and society at large. But folks who are calling for a return to family values are usually talking about something out of the 1950s. You know, dad works, mom stays home and cleans house, and the two kids, are well-mannered and well-groomed. The trouble is, those aren't the values portrayed in most of the Bible, and particularly not in our biblical passage from Genesis. For this is no Ozzie and Harriet family. No, this is a polyamorous family. A dad, two moms, and two not very well-mannered, probably not well-groomed kids who are half-brothers. And while in the 50s model of life, father is supposed to know best, in this story, Abraham is weak and vacillating and hardly what one would call a pillar of family strength. Abraham and Sarah, you see, have been promised descendants, many descendants. Count the stars in the sky, God tells them. That's how many descendants you're going to have. But nothing seems to be happening. Sarah's biological clock is ticking at a very fast rate. And she and Abraham are getting a bit anxious about things. And so they decide to take matters in their own hands. Now you need to understand that in that day, if a child was born to a slave, the child could be counted as the offspring of the woman of the house, the wife of the patriarch. So if a slave owned by Sarah was born and had a child, that child could be counted as Sarah's child. So Sarah tells Abraham to have intercourse with one of her slave girls, an Egyptian woman named Hagar. "Go into my slave girl," she says in that polite way that the Bible has of talking about sex. "Go into her, it may be that I shall obtain children by her." Abraham does. No real surprise there, like any red-blooded Middle Eastern guy. And Hagar gets pregnant. When word reaches Sarah, though, she immediately gets consumed by the great green monster known as envy. It doesn't help that Hagar lords it over her. "I'm fertile. I got pregnant. You couldn't." Sarah complains to Abraham. "Leave me out of it," he says. "You can handle the situation any way you want." Again, the Bible is polite, as it tells us that Sarah dealt harshly with her. Maybe she gave her even more work to do. Maybe she had her whipped. Maybe she deprived her of food. Who knows? Whatever, it was bad enough that Hagar runs off. But then comes the first divine intervention. God sends an angel who tells Hagar to go back. Go back to Sarah and Abraham. "Despite appearances, Hagar, know that you are in God's good graces, even if you're not in Sarah's. In fact, you," says the angel, "you, Hagar, will have many offspring, many descendants in your own right." So Hagar goes back, gives birth, and her son is named Ishmael, which means God has heard. For God heard Hagar in her wilderness of despair. And for a bit, things seem to go all right, until, wonder of wonders, 90-year-old Sarah gets pregnant and gives birth to a child who's called Isaac. So little Ishmael now has a half-brother. But Sarah's not real happy. She's not real happy having this little rugrat around whose very presence reminds her every single day that she had given up on God's word, that she once had been barren, and that her husband had slept with another woman. It was more than she could handle. And one morning, when she sees the two boys playing together as siblings will do, she blows up Abraham, I just won't put up with this anymore. No slave girl's kid is going to split the inheritance with my son. I want him out now. The matter was very distressing to Abraham, the text politely says. Very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. Now, let's be clear here about the antecedent. The son in question isn't Isaac. It's Ishmael. Abraham had really grown to love the little boy. But then God steps in again. Don't worry, old man. I'll see that Ishmael and his mom are taken care of. Go ahead, send them away. And so Abraham does. He doesn't argue with God. He doesn't say, Hagar was just doing what she was told, and Ishmael's my son. Nope, not a word of protest on Abraham's part. He just rolls over. He caves in. He gets up early the next day, gives them some bread and a couple of bottles of Gatorade, and sends them on their way. Obviously, it doesn't take too long in the desert for the supplies to run out, and so Hagar places her son under a bush to die and crawls away as far as she can because she's not willing to see the life drain out of her child. And she starts to weep. And then there is an intriguing line in the text at this point. And God heard the voice of the boy. There's no report what he says. No words of Ishmael's are recorded. But this is what I like to imagine. When Ishmael sees his mother in tears, he gets up out of that bush and walks over to where she is and takes her face in his chubby little hands and brushes away a tear and says, "Don't cry, Mama. We'll be okay." I've no scholarly proof of that, but it seems right. And if you've ever had a small child wipe away a tear or give you a hug when you're crying, you know what I mean. It's an expression of faith in its own childlike way. Love will prevail. Good will break through. We'll be okay. And God hears. God hears that childlike expression of hope and faith and love and sends yet another angel. "Don't be afraid," says the angel. Don't they always seem to say that? Fear not. Don't be afraid. God heard your little one. Hold on to him, Hagar. He is going to be the father of a great nation. And then the text says, God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water, and they were saved. And from then on, God was with the boy. God was with Ishmael. Not just Isaac, the child of the covenant, but God was with the boy, Ishmael, father of a great nation. Even as Isaac would become the father of a great nation. Ishmael, the son of Abraham, through whom Muslims trace their lineage back to Abraham, even as Jews trace their lineage back through Isaac. These two sons, if you will, and their separate paths are the point in the biblical story that we might call the Great Divide. Though it will be centuries before Islam comes into being, though it will be centuries before Jews are called Jews, this is when the division is said to occur. A division that comes about because of an enormously dysfunctional family. And later, of course, another divide as Christianity comes into being. Yet, we who are now known as Christians also claim Abrahamic parentage in and through Jesus the Jew. Muslims, Christians, Jews, all children of Abraham. And yet, last Monday, in the quiet and diverse neighborhood of Finsbury Park in London, as worshipers left their mosque after evening prayers during Ramadan, the holiest season of the year, a van, seemingly out of nowhere, swerved into the crowd. 9 were injured, 1 killed, as the driver of the van, a white Christian man from Wales, ran into the pedestrians and was heard to shout, "I'm going to kill all Muslims, I did my bit." Last month, as a caravan of Coptic Christians were crossing the desert on pilgrimage, on their way to the monastery of St. Samuel the Confessor, they were stopped by 15 gunmen. One of the few survivors, a mere boy, told reporters, "They asked my father for identification and then told him to recite the Muslim profession of faith. He refused and said he was a Christian. They killed him and everyone else." Again and again, history is marred by such stories. Jews killing Muslims, Muslims killing Jews, Christians killing both, and all of them killing each other. The children of Abraham have not lived up to divine expectations. We have allowed ourselves to be ruled by division and not by our common bond. It is, of course, easy for us, sitting here on Sanibel, to claim that we are innocent, that we're not the ones shooting guns or using vans as battering rams, and it's true, we are not. In fact, historically, this very congregation has done much to repair the breach, to overcome the divide. We have spent time getting to know some of our Jewish and Muslim neighbors. We have spent time learning about our different faith traditions. We share our space, our very lives at times, with another congregation, with a Jewish congregation. We have welcomed rabbis and imams to our pulpit and to our lecterns. And friends, that is all good. Trust me, it is very, very, very good. Indeed, these are some of the most powerful ways we can and do bear witness to our ultimate unity as children of Abraham. Might we always do such things. But there is no doubt that we can do more. And examining for a moment or two our text and this story of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar can help. For think again about this powerful tale. Think again of the factors that lead to Sarah having Abraham cast out Hagar and Ishmael. First, there is a profound lack of faith. Sarah and Abraham had been promised a child by God, But they gave up on God and gave in to fear and anxiety. How often do we do the same? How often do we allow fear, not faith, to rule our lives? How often does that fear impact our dealings with people who are different? People with differing politics, differing religious understandings, differing sexual orientations, with racial differences. How often are we ruled by fear and not faith? Second, there is often a lack of courage and a failure to stand up and say, that's wrong. Abraham knew in his heart of hearts that casting Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert was not the loving thing to do. How often do we fail to speak up? How often do we fail to act, fail to do the right thing? Third, there is often a lack of generosity, and decisions are dictated about concerns about property and power rather than concerns about the needs of all people. Sarah didn't want anyone sharing the inheritance with her son Isaac, and the very presence of Ishmael was a threat to that monopoly on property and power. How often do we fail to work so that systems might be changed, so that all might share in the good things of the earth? I'm not sure the Great Divide explains everything that's wrong in our society, but I know this powerful story does hold these clues to how we might begin to address the divisiveness and hatred that seems so rampant. I believe that if we acted out of love rather than self-interest, it would make a difference. I believe if we had more courage, more backbone, we could begin to address the wrongs around us. I believe if we had a more generous spirit, it would change the world. I believe that if we really trusted that ultimately we are brothers and sisters, that ultimately we are one with all people, I believe that if we really trusted that, our world would become what God intended from creation. And we would live as a family, a functional family. For my money,